All right, so let's move on to green. What was first up on that list? He says to himself out loud because he needs to develop an inner monologue. Survival of the fittest. It's stupid. You just tutor as many times as you friggin' want, as many creatures as you have in your hand. You can fill your graveyard with creatures. You can turn your Landboar elf into anything else. It deserves to be here. It's very difficult to kill. I think survival of the fittest being here and Shauna fauna shaman not being here makes sense because you have to be able to, I believe, tap the fauna shaman.
Yeah.
And it's a 2/2, so it's really easy to kill. Survival of the fittest, on the other hand, you can use it multiple times in a turn. It's absolutely absurd. One of the best cards in green that they've ever seen.
Should be banned. I don't think this goes far enough.
I agree.
From my experience, if you're doing anything with survival, it's usually busted. I mean, sometimes it's turning your Llanowar elf into your reclamation sage so that you can, play reactive, but way more often than that, it's tutoring up your, Vorinclex or your Maze End Forerunners or Crater Hoof, and you're murdering your opponent and getting to do it multiple times. So you just go, pay 5 mana, put any, discard a card from my hand, and then take any 3 creatures from my deck and put them into my graveyard, and then end with my best creature in hand is just, it's so, so good. But now, John, I know that you've played this card, still play it, have some experience with it. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't want it banned because I think I would go down a tax bracket. Just in terms of, because I used to play it in Legacy,
Monetary?
so like I have my playset. And I just
Ooh.
put them into 4 different commander decks. I don't even know if I have that many, but that many green ones.
You have more survival of the fittest than you have commander decks. Oh my god.
Green commander decks
Okay.
that I care to pimp out, and yeah, maybe we're not qualifying this the right way. But anyway, yeah, I love this card. I love resolving this card and using it, and it's busted. It should definitely be on this list, if not banned. I don't think it should be banned. I don't know.
But if you take your bias away, then
Maybe it is a repeatable tutor. Like it's obviously banned from the lower brackets, just being multiple tutors in one card. And it is certainly like any creature combo is just one card in a can. Just survival. Anytime you draw a creature, you inch towards that creature combo in a remarkable way. And like you say, my like Tenem deck just like find 3 different creatures I want in my filth to give all my creatures unblockable, my glory to give all my creatures protection from whatever colors I need to, the thing that I want to reanimate, and then a big fatty to cast at the end, or like an eternal witness to get some action going. Like it does all that, and it also is just like the perfect tutor for my creature combo Reki deck. It's just card is busted.
I used to discard the Crater Hoof Behemoth to find Karmic Guide and just smile at my opponent at the end of their turn.
So my Reki deck doesn't have a Crater Hoof Behemoth because that's how hard I lean into the I'm gonna cast whatever I want off my combo and go infinite, and it doesn't matter. I don't need to end the game with a Behemoth. I'm not doing that math.
Oh my god. So yeah, obviously survival of the fittest is on this list. Good include. Next up was Vorinclex, the Voice of Hunger. Yep.
Yep.
Whenever you tap the land, you get double, and then your opponents get hosed hard. Like this card ends games. Period. If it resolves and it is not answered with mana that you tap in response to it being cast, you're gonna get fucked up. And there's really not much to say about it. It's huge. It's a great reanimator target, and if somehow you get to untap with all your lands, like, ta-da, you're set up to cast the rest of your hand the next turn. with your opponents tapped down forever, basically. Good include.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, especially because if your opponent is out of cheap removal when you cast it, if you ever have to answer a Vorinclex with, a 3, a 4, a 5 mana spell, like you're not playing the game anymore. Like and that's if you're first in the turn order. Like otherwise you have to decide to skip your turn or skip your next turn when you play something. So you just go around the table passing until someone can kill it. The card is just insane. And obviously at higher brackets, you'll never ever see it in play. But at the lower bracket tables, and certainly for bracket number 3, like you're definitely going to want this to be on the game changers list. So it makes a lot of sense.
You could see it in bracket 4 with reanimation and ways of cheating stuff out. You could absolutely see this in bracket 4. It might make its way into a fringe CEDH deck or something if you have like a birthing pod, an aggressive birthing pod deck. We'll talk about birthing pod in a second. Or like there's ways of just cheating it out. Like you natural order it out. I don't know if that's banned. I'm gonna look that up.
No, that's legal. I've done this play you have mentioned. I do this regularly.
So
that thing that belongs in a bracket 4 or 5 is legal in a bracket 3. Yeah, so kind of explains why it needs to be on this list then.
It's only one tutor.
I played Vorinclex in my Recce deck, and I have cast it and generated mana without doing untap shenanigans. Because you just like Kodama's Reach a couple times, and then all of a sudden you have enough like, I'll tap my Soul Ring and 2 lands because I've got other mana doubling effects, and then it enters, and it's like, oh, that just generated mana.
It's a ritual.
Yeah, and like you were saying, like the hero, the absolute hero who can answer this pays the biggest price for tapping mana to do something about it. But you can't leave it alone because I get twice as much mana every time I untap. I don't really untap with this often because I usually win, but like the turn it comes, same turn it comes into play. That's how busted this effect is. But if I've ever untapped with it, I would win that turn anyway.
Yeah, conceding is a special action that can occur at any time. Yep. So obvious include there. Good job. Next one, even somehow more obvious than Vorinclex. Gaia's Cradle. I mean, yeah.
Not far enough.
It's ridiculous. It is. Every green deck that can play it should play it, except we're all poor. People who have it are either like John and bought it when it was cheap, or independently wealthy. It was used to be a $20 card. What's it up to, like $7.50? If you can find it moderately used. It's absurd. It just enables everything. God forbid you have a Candelabra or Magus of the Candelabra or anything that untaps lands. Suddenly it's just like, well, I guess I'll just, resolve every friggin' card in my deck at the same time because I just have that much mana. Gaia's Cradle. Yep. It's because we pissed off Mother Nature and she's gonna fuck you up. That's why it exists.
Yeah, I mean, lands in general that make more than 1 mana, very strong. Probably don't belong in weaker bracket decks. Gaia's Cradle in general doesn't belong in formats. Like, it definitely does not belong in EDH. We could have other discussions about 60 card formats, but yeah, the card is just absurd. I don't think this goes far enough, but I think it's a step in the right direction to have it on the game changers list for sure. I know that John is gonna come out here with his I like tapping it and getting a lot of mana point of view, but let's hear what John has to say about Gaia's Cradle on the game changers list.
I agree. It's probably not enough to game changer it. It is a dumb card. Like, most of the times when Vorinclex generates mana, it's because I just tapped a Gaia's Cradle to cast it. You know, it's one of the few cards that's just like like you can play an Expedition map, sack it, find Gaia's Cradle, and generate mana on that exchange very easily. It's
Prop rotate into Gaia's Cradle and just watch your opponent bleed out their eyes. Like,
yeah,
it's ridiculous.
like
Why is Gaia's Cradle legal and Tolarian Academy illegal? I'm not saying Tolarian Academy should be legal. It shouldn't. But what the hell?
like Tolarian Academy doesn't exist in the same color as crop rotation. Every Gaia's Cradle deck can, for like $1.50 more, be a 2 Gaia's Cradle deck. And probably
you play
should.
the Growing Rite of Ilmatok, and it's a 2.5 Gaia's Cradle deck now.
Well, that Itlamok at least has to go like to an end step or something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and cost 3 mana to play.
The Baby Cradle, yeah.
But still, holy crap, is that card just dumb?
Yeah.
Hmm.
So
I feel like the less we say about it, the better, because it's just so obvious. Don't underestimate this card.
On that note, specifically that note, I think Rite of Itlamok should be on the Game Changer list as well. Yes, it has circumstances. I mean, I don't know about you, but I think green is the least likely to have 3 creatures during an end step. That's sarcasm for those of you who have difficulty discerning that. It's absurd. It's absurd. It gets you a creature, it replenishes itself in the hand, and it flips.
What about
Gaia's Cradle should be banned. I think Gaia's Cradle should be banned, and Itlamok should be on the Game Changers list. I think that's the way that should work. Just bump them each up a level of intensity.
What about, I think it's Druid of the Cradle? It's just like a 3 mana Gaia's Cradle creature.
I'm more okay with that because it's a small creature, and it has to survive a whole turn rotation, and like it's much easier. Whereas Itlamok just needs to get to your end step.
Yeah,
and then it's
a land,
and then it's a literal Gaia's Cradle that can also tap for 1 green in the event of a board wipe. But the Druid of the Circle or whatever it's called, that one, I think that one's a lot more fair. In the same reason that I wouldn't put like a Priest of Titania or a Elvish Archdruid or the Wirewood Channeler on this list, because they don't have haste inherently.
Yeah. I think to also mention that, I said the less we say, the better. I'm running that back. Since land destruction is much maligned and is like excluded on like principle in a lot of the lower tiers, it's really hard to get any way to interact with a Gaia's Cradle or a Sarah Sanctum just because they're a land. Mm-hmm. And like if you run the proper cards to interact with them, you're like hated from the you're like, oh, finger wagged from the table, you know?
Mm. So a piece of advice that I have that I've never actually gotten any pushback on is running because people will take that attitude and abuse it with like the most absurd utility lands out there. I run a Ghost Quarter and a Field of Ruin in every commander deck that I have because I'm not stopping you from casting your spells. The reason people don't like whatchamacallit, land destruction and mana denial is because it stops you from playing the game. Whereas like you're trying to Lair of the Hydra me for 50 and I need some way of stopping that from happening. Whereas you're gonna play Academy Runes and then put the friggin' Mindslaver and get me every turn with that. Like I need a way of stopping that. And I feel like lands that replace the land that they kill are a lot fairer, and I typically don't try to do mana denial with those if I'm not on a high-powered game. So that's my little pitch. Run Ghost Quarter and Field of Ruin in every deck that you play, along with Reliquary Tower.
And Demolition Field, probably, too.
Yeah.
Demolition Field, yeah.
Take 4 colorless lands and just jam them into all your decks.
So we mentioned 2 of these cards that I'm about to mention earlier in the green segment. But there's like this whole category of green tutor that I think is really, really, really overpowered to the point where it should be included, and that is like Birthing Pod type effects. So that is Birthing Pod, that's Eldritch Evolution, That's natural order, for fuck's sake. That's all of these cards that allow you to sacrifice a creature and then cheat a creature in play. Especially something like natural order, where it's not like restricted by the overall mana. But when you run those, they are so much more dangerous, especially Birthing Pod. So much more dangerous, because with the other ones, at least like you can counter them, and then it's a 2-for-1. Shouts out to our old podcast name. Um, and you're it's an addition to cast the spell. It's an additional cost. So you're still sacrificing the creature. Now your opponent counters it. You lost the spell and the creature. Birthing Pod, you only lose the spell because the ability is what fucking matters there. So being able to use an ability and then cheat your creatures out like that is absurdly strong. And I think that that class of card, at least Birthing Pod and Natural Order, should be included in the green list. What are you guys' thoughts about that?
I think that Natural Order is an obvious game changer that belongs on the list, for the same reasons you mentioned, just turning a 1-drop into an 8-drop. It's not only a tutor, but a ritual. Puts it directly into play, so your opponent doesn't get to see what's up until it's already happened. Very, very powerful. I don't necessarily think the same of Birthing Pod, but I don't have a strong opinion on it. I could see it being on the list or off the list. Tutors, obviously, in general, very strong. But at least with Birthing Pod, you have the restrictions not only in the mana value that you're getting of the creature, but the initial investment as well. Like you have to play the creature, then the pod, and then use the pod at least once. Maybe you're kind of like comboing off with it and can untap the pod, in which case you have to jump through a couple of hoops. But it's not quite the same as just like natural order out your Terastodon, Woodfall Primus, or any of the ridiculous 8 to 10 mana spells. At least you have to jump through a couple of hoops for Birthing Pod. What do you think, John? Chims, if you have something to...
No, please, John, go ahead.
The fact that Birthing Pod just like combos with a lot of cards kind of takes it over the top for me. I was gonna wonder, like, Birthing Pod is green by color identity, but it's colorless by play pattern. So I don't know where it belongs on this list, but
I'd say green for the commander tier list.
Yeah, because like you do need to be green to play it. Whether you need green mana or not is different. But yeah, it's if it didn't also just combo with like everything, I'd be much more inclined to like give it the pass. But it's like multiple tutors in one card. It's the mana value thing is very easily gotten around, and that's like you're not sacking 3 mana value worth of effect when you sack a 3 mana card. You're sacking like the Pilgrim's Eye body. You got your
That's
effect
fair.
when it entered. You're getting way more, or you're like getting a Woodland Bellower to pick up a different 3-drop, and it's just so easy to break, so easy to pull ahead. If you're doing it fairly, it's still busted because you're just tutoring every turn. I don't know.
Like the worst case scenario for that card is like you just get silver bullet pieces. Like I get a Reclamation Sage and shoot your shit out of the yard. I get an Eternal Witness and grab back my stuff. Hell, even like, I mean, it's not really playable, but like you grab a Thrag Tusk, you gain the life, and suddenly you're getting a 3/3 and a 6-drop next turn. Like even the worst case scenario is just ridiculous. I can see Eldritch Evolution not being included there because you're not getting multiple cards out of it. I abuse the shit out of those effects in my decks that I run them in. Like they are some of the stronger cards for me to resolve. So maybe I'm a little biased because I have decks that are like built around them. But Birthing Pod and Natural Order, like we're all in agreement on Natural Order, and Birthing Pod itself, just because it's repeatable, even without the combo part, which is definitely how it's played in CEDH. It's still ridiculously powerful.
Yeah, I think that John has actually swayed me, and I'm now in the camp where birthing pod should probably also be on this list. I would still exclude um, what is it, evolution, just because again it takes so much to invest, and you're restricted by mana value, and it's not repeatable. But I think that I've definitely been swung on the birthing pod argument. So I do now consider that a miss. But natural order, yeah, everyone should be in agreement that that is like a clear and obvious exclusion.
Now, John, you're the resident green player. You play mono green better than I've seen most people play it in
Oh, you're gonna make me
Commander.
blush.
But what you I know you had a couple others that you were looking at in terms of green in particular. What would you include on this list?
So I don't know if this is just me, but I don't know if I've ever resolved a Genesis wave for like 6 or more without just winning the game on the spot.
Yeah.
The card seems very easy to cast for large numbers very easily and convert that to a win. And it all you need is lands in play. Comes right off the top and does it all. I don't know. Card seems very like the game isn't interesting after that card resolves.
Yeah, I could see Genesis Wave being included on this list. Sometimes it feels like a win more card because to cast it for 6 you have 9 mana.
That's fair.
Like if it's 6 or above, absolutely. I think it's one of the best mana sinks in green, which has, apart from artifacts, probably the most explosive mana base in Magic. So I could see that being included.
And it might just be that like my modus operandi is to have 9 mana, and that's maybe not everyone else's thing. But most commander games, I feel like most people are trying to get to that amount of mana. Like if it's as game winning as expropriate at expropriate's mana cost in the color that's better at ramping, I feel like
that's a good argument.
It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
But there's slightly more deck building cost in that you need permanence in your green Genesis Wave deck, but it's pretty easy. I don't.
You need that's a very loose deck building requirement.
Yeah.
You have to have must have permanence.
Yeah, I would push back on the Genesis Wave, and that's just because, again, similar to my argument as before, I don't think it goes in every green deck to the same degree. Like, you don't just jam it in every deck just because you're green. It is good when you cast it, as John mentioned, if it's X6 or above, like you're hitting a huge grip full of cards and you just immediately dump them onto the battlefield. But there's also a good chance when you cast it for, 6 to 10 that I don't want to say you miss, but you don't hit something that instantly ends the game unless your deck is built to have a ton of enters the battlefield effects or ways to untap your lands or generate even more mana. Like if you cast it and you hit a mana doubler and 2 lands and you get to untap a land and then you continue going off, then, oh yeah, it'll kill your opponent. But most X spells, when you cast them for that amount of mana, like think about, what is it? Hour of Devastation, Finale of Devastation.
Finale of
Yeah,
Devastation.
it's just you tutor up anything you want, and all of your creatures become huge, and you kill your opponent. You could green Sun Zenith for a Craterhoof Behemoth and kill your opponent. Like when you get to that amount of mana, which green decks are able to do, there are a ton of cards that will kill your opponent with no uncertainty.
Yeah,
and I just think that
that's fair. Like I usually have a mana doubler, so any lands I hit are double. So it's very easy to go mana positive, but not every deck is doing that.
The other
Exactly,
thing worth mentioning is kind of a catch-22. The faster and more reliable you are to get to that 9 mana, to get that Gen Wave for 6, the more mana shit you have to have in your deck. The more mana stuff you have in your deck, the more likely you are to hit more mana stuff instead of big fatty threats. Either way, it's really good.
No.
Obviously, it's Genesis Wave. It's a fire card. But with that, it's like I think that it's more fair than not, because unless you hit the Crater Hoof or something that hastes, there's still a whole turn rotation before you get to attack with those creatures, and there's a good chance that somebody's going to Wrath or at least remove the big threat before you resolve. You do draw the big red ag arrow after you gen wave for like 12.
I will say that
where I'm at with it.
my big fatty threats are also mana sources, so like I don't have to choose. I just kind of get them when they show up.
The
But
boring
Yeah.
click, yeah.
one of the things I would think of is like, what is the point of this list? Like, this is sort of the French EDH style, or Canadian Highlander, is it? Like, point
Yeah,
value.
Canlander.
Like,
Mhm.
that's what this system is doing. Is like, oh, you can have good cards, but you can't have all of them. This goes back to a conversation uh, Andy and I had a while ago, where like cards have deck building costs, but once you're already paid the deck building costs, the other cards that have the same deck building cost don't actually have that cost anymore. So like once you've already decided to put a bunch of artifacts in your deck, like the Mox Opals are free. Like it's
Yep.
the best Mox ever printed because you already paid that cost. You're not paying more for it. So like if the point of this list is to sort of compensate for those deck building costs, like piling up and not actually adding up, even though you're piling them on top of each other. That would be a way to sort of handle that, is like, oh, this super ramp card is only good in the best super ramp decks. We'll make it cost them a point. That's sort of just what this is. It's like you have 3 points to allocate towards, whatever, and one of them maybe is a Genesis Wave or whatever, and then you can't. If I couldn't Genesis Wave into Vorinclex or Gaia's Cradle, it'd be way worse. It'd be way less game
That's
winning
true.
every time I cast it. So
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like the whole purpose of the Game Changers list is to stop every deck that could play card X, Y, or Z from playing those cards. Because with limited exception of the 25 or so cards that we've covered so far, I would put them in every deck that can possibly play them. Every white card aside from Sarah's Sanctum, every blue card aside from possibly Jataxius, every black card. In every black deck, it should just start out with every one of the Game Changers with limited exceptions. All of your red decks should be playing Underworld Breach and Justice Will. So the reason to, cap you at 3 of them is so that your decks cannot do that. And I just think that when I'm building a commander deck and I start out with forests, the first thing that I jump to is not necessarily Genesis Wave. I think that it's good, and I think that it has places where it is absurdly strong, like in your commander deck. But I don't think that every green deck, should play it, and therefore making it a game changer doesn't really restrict in the same way.
yeah, I guess maybe I have a different thought of where I would go with this list, but
Yeah.
I mean it's certainly valid either way, or maybe both ways. Like maybe they should stretch it in both ways, or maybe the way it is fine. But
I agree. Yeah. I think that
Ah.
there's definitely different motives, and we're not given the clearest
yeah,
reason for it. I mean, they give us a little explanation, and it does certainly make sense. But there's definitely some inferring that we have to do, and there are different things that we can take from it. So I see both points of view for sure.
It's going to be interesting to see where they develop this list too, because it is guiding all of Commander. There is like a fundamental disagreement or debate, more accurately, around what Commander is in general. So, like, personally, I don't think Commander is an inherently casual format. There are social aspects to it, but with the amount of cards that are available, there's always going to be stuff that slips through the cracks, whether it be natural order in this instance, or when we talk a little bit later about the multicolored cards. Like, are we going to discuss the a whole host of cards basically
yeah.
that's not on that list? Is there a reason? Like, is Soul Ring, should that even be there? They've already started talking about that, but if Mana Crypt is there, then is Soul Ring? Yes, it's ubiquitous, but again, is the reason to stop everyone from playing all of those cards? And if so, isn't Soul Ring absolutely ripe for that? You know, really, it's going to be It's going to be cool. But one of my key takeaways is just how much thought actually went into this list and these brackets. It definitely seems like something they've been working on for a while. Now,
In terms of like,
go ahead.
To go back to what Andy was saying, it was like, oh, if my deck is this color, I want to add this card. I think in terms of green cards, Seedborn Muse jumps to my mind as a card that I put in almost every green deck.
Yep.
That like
It's incredibly
wants to pass the turn to its opponent at any point.
Has to be dealt with the turn it resolves.
Yeah.
There's no rotate around the table, kill it now before your next turn starts. Yep.
Yeah, that one's kind of just like, I mean, Eternal Witness is kind of the same. Like, I want it in every green deck, but that's not like busted. Whereas Seedborn Muse, like any turn, anytime you untap with it, which is any opponent's untap step, it's really game changing.
Look at me. This is our turn now.
Yeah.
Prophet is banned, right? Prophet of Krufix.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Rightfully fucking so.
Yeah, Prophet let you cast your creatures, but only untap your lands. But like Seaborn Muse, I don't know. It has similar. It does the better part of what Prophet does, which is untap a lot of stuff. And sometimes it's better if you've got rocks or activated abilities or.
Having had a deck that played both for a while, my Rune of the Hidden Realms, the number one target for any tutor that I did, any Eldritch Evolution that I did was Prophet of Krufix. That good riddance. I miss it because it won me more games than any other card in Commander at the time. If you didn't kill it immediately and you let me get to my next turn, you lose. Because it was so obnoxious, but I didn't do it on purpose. I used to accidentally pass my opponent's turns because I would forget whose turn it actually was. and like it was, I didn't mean to do it. It was obnoxious, but it certainly felt like it was my fucking turn.
Yeah. Like Prophet's clearly better, but Seedborn being in the same conversation as Prophet is like warning bells that maybe it should be worth a point. I don't know.
Yeah,
I would have to agree. The decks that run it, it's not every deck that it maximizes its value in, but anytime you have any type of ability from anything, any mana sink, any tap ability, it just runs people over. Like, it enables such bullshit.
I mean, it gives you vigilance too, right? Just like you should just always play the card. So I mean, it fits at least my ideas of why they put this list together. So I do think that's from my standpoint, that's an obvious include. But another thing that I think is missing from this list that just definitely should have been on here is Defense of the Heart, which is a tutor that is also a ritual. It gets your 2 best creatures out of your deck with very little cost. Any opponent just has to have 3 creatures, which is guaranteed in the game of Commander. Players are going to progress their board, and then it just rips, a Vorinclex out of your deck, costing you 1 point, and a Nyx Bloom Ancient or something.
Vorinclex is too small ball. Like, you get Mike and Trike. Like, you get 2 creatures.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you can just, it's very easy to just win the game. Oh, Mikaeus not being on the blacklist. Is that an omission?
Which Mikaeus?
The Unhallowed, the one that turns Triskelion into an instant win. Like, all your non-humans have Undying. Maybe it's just because it's a 2-card combo piece.
Yeah, it's a 2-card combo piece.
Combo.
Otherwise, it's fair.
Yeah.
So that's otherwise it's fair.
That's
without Triskelion or something like that. Yeah, but
never mind. But
or even Walking Ballista.
The whole Walking Lista would have to, yeah, it would come back with a counter. Yeah, easy.
So
Another
any
way
of
to
those
get,
like are 2 cards for it, yeah.
yeah, another way to get to that combo is Protean Hulk. I know Flash is banned, right? But like, I think the real culprit is Protean Hulk. Is like just a one card win con where it's just like, oh, get Machias, get Walking Ballista, win,
Hmm.
or any number of other combos you could fit into your deck that recur the Protean Hulk and find more stuff like you can natural order it into play, you can reanimate it. Like, I also don't know what you would flash other than Protean Hulk. Like Sundering Titans banned. I'm sure there's some busted card I don't know exists, but
Protean Hulk on its own at turn 8 isn't that crazy.
costs 7, but you can cheat it
Yeah,
easily.
yeah, you can cheat it definitely, but like, frankly, if I'm using an Eldritch Evolution or I'm cheating it in play, like if I Court of Calling for 7, I'm getting something different.
I feel
Something that just is more impactful.
if you put it in your deck, it's because it's the most impactful thing, which does take a lot of deck building slots. So maybe you wouldn't, but
Yeah,
like,
Yeah, I
I
guess
feel
it
you.
depends on how you're getting the kill with it, about
Yeah.
whether or not, like it qualifies as weak enough for brackets,
Like
for
maybe it's
bracket
just
3.
only a combo card and therefore is excluded because of the combo restriction. But it definitely seems like if you put it in your deck, it's because it is win the game when this dies.
That's fair. Well, that was green. Or actually, no, there was another card that you had put.
Yeah.
I remember.
Food Chain is kind of. Did we go over Food Chain?
Yeah, I think Food Chain. Now that I've given it some thought, right? Food Chain is a really good line for Victory and Gruel. It's you play the Squee that you can cast from exile, and you just have infinite mana, right? But that's covered by 2-card infinites.
Yeah.
And
And
without that, Food Chain is good, but it's not busted.
Yeah. There's a bunch of commanders that just like win with it, but that's just combo.
Yeah.
2 or less card combo. So it's probably
Yeah,
just covered
because
by that.
the restriction on combo isn't a kill. It's no 2-card infinite.
Yep.
So even Squee and Food Chain, like, because we had talked about possibly needing a third piece, to make use of infinite colorless mana before. But just even infinite colorless mana, not allowed. You just can't have 2-card infinite combos.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so like Food Chain and Squee is just not allowed. Regardless of whether or not you need a third thing to like make use of it, it's just not allowed.
The other card that you had mentioned on your list that I think is worth talking about, but I've given some thought to, is Scape Shift, John.
Yeah.
I don't know if that should be a game changer. It requires a lot of specific setup, like a lot of specific setup, both in board state and deck building, in order for it to be broken, in my opinion.
Yeah. But it's a sort of like.
In Commander.
Huh?
Is it just Prismatic Omen? I said, how do you do it in Commander? Is it just Prismatic Omen or Dryad? Like, what are you scape shifting into? Still Valakut, right?
I mean, you
Or
could
no?
just get Nykthos, Gaia's Cradle, Deserted Temple, and that's probably good enough.
I ran it in some specific decks, like Titania Protector of Aragoth. When land exits the battle, when the land dies under my control, I get a 5/3. I've played it in the Gitrog monster, which sits in this weird spot where it's too good for casual, too slow for competitive. Valakut, not as much, man. Like
it takes a lot to kill someone with Valakut in Commander.
It is an absurd amount, actually. But like just getting like a Glacial Chasm or the Shrine to Nyx or the Gaia's Cradle or the Sanctum. Excuse me. There's like a lot of utility lands that you can grab, but I don't think it's just like an immediate win unless you have a really specific setup.
Yeah,
to it.
like you're doing like Aftermath Analyst Lumra loops if
Sure.
you're doing this, but like that's a deck, you know?
Yeah.
Or you're getting the Mystic Sanctuary with Spelunking to like cast as many escape shifts as you want, which is, you know, ton of deck building
Sounds
costs.
pretty good. But yeah, a high deck building cost.
But yeah, it's like it is a one card win con in the right deck, but you need the right deck. It's also kind of multiple tutors. I don't know.
I would call it multiple tutors.
Like I mentioned it because I saw it on my table and I was like, I played a commander game where someone cast it and the game was over, and it didn't feel like it was over at any time before they cast it.
Right.
And it just immediately was over, and I was like, oh, maybe this card that tutors for 5 or more cards is good. But
It is good. It is
like,
very
like
good.
you say,
but does it deserve to be a tick off the game changer list is the real question.
Yeah, it's not like goes in every green deck. It's, you know, you build your deck around it, and if we're trying to rein those decks in with this like Canadian Highlander system, that could be a way to do it, but I don't know if that's what we're doing. You know, maybe a more granular list where like these cards are worth 1 point. The like Imperial Seals are worth like, you know, the cards that every deck would play are worth 3 points. So like you really have to pony up if you want them. But then that's very complicated. So
Right.
I would be into seeing a list like that, like a more like almost like it feels like a HeroClix army building point total, you know? Like let's have a 500 point deck, and then you just go for it. That could be interesting.
well, that is
as like a potential format, yeah.
Yeah, there is a format that is that, but the whole point of this is to like show your deck list to a judge, and they very quickly can say, okay, you're in bracket 3.
That's fair.
So
all right, so
So-
the next, go ahead.
So Nick, you had actually mentioned as well Collector Oof.
We had talked about. I figured that would fall under the "it hurts me as much as it hurts you" kind of symmetrical stacks pieces that we were discussing before. I will say that in games where I have resolved it and sort of built my deck around knowing that I'm going to resolve Collector Oof, either through like an Eldritch Evolution, like because that was actually the most common tutor target for me that wasn't immediately winning the game in my Sisay CEDH deck was Collector Oof. I would just I wouldn't necessarily Worldly Tutor. I didn't want to like announce it, but if I'm gonna Green Sun for 2, or I'm gonna sacrifice a Mana Dork to an Eldritch Evolution or the Simic one that's uncommon, I'm getting Collector Oof.
Or
Like it's coming out on the board. Good luck, fellas. And even when I was playing things like Dockside behind it, right? Like my deck didn't need the artifacts to win. It was just sort of a nice to have. So all I would do is just, I'd build up some artifacts behind it, but I'd keep playing my game normally. They're totally gimped. They're not playing anything. Like they're 1 mana hand because they had a Chrome Mox and a Mox Diamond and into a Soul Ring Signet suddenly wasn't very good anymore. And so they have to draw into killing it. And by then, not only have I been playing other spells, but I've also gotten like at the time, this is going to date the deck, my Dockside out, right? So I have like 30 treasure tokens that are just ready to fucking go sitting behind this thing.
yeah, Collector Oof's like the we all play Soul Ring, but if you have them and I don't, guess what I'm finding?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like an equalizer.
And
So
it's
you don't have to play it if you start with the awesome Soul Ring Signet start, but
exactly. and for me, like the reason I didn't actually bring it up, but I'm glad you did, was in thinking about it since we were talking, it's really only that brutal 2 decks in the high tier CEDH. Because a lot of other decks are going to run like you'll run a mana rock or two, sure, but you're not as totally reliant. You're not running like 27 lands in a non-CEDH deck, right? You're running like 33, 34, 35, and you can get around a little easier. It's also a 2/2,
Yeah.
so it's just like it dies to anything but gut shot, basically.
Well, my ramp is like Kodama's Reach, and you play a Collector Roof against me. I'm like, you did it. Strats.
Exactly.
But when all my mana's in expensive Mox Diamonds and whatnot, Collector Roof is game winning.
Yes. That's exactly it. So why don't we pick this up in our next episode? We're going to be talking about. Let me see what we left off with. I believe it was multicolored cards and the infamous artifacts, which is probably the largest section of this list, being the artifacts. Depending on how this is edited, I hope that you guys enjoy the rest of your time. Thank you all for watching us on this video. We really appreciate it, and may your birds remain unbolted until you get to untap.
Unless you have a Seedborn Muse in play.
Unless you have a Seedborn Muse, in which case, that's got to go too. If you want to see us review the game changers in general and the bracket system, click here. If you want to see another video on a different color, click here. Now both my hands are up.